The microphone was still warm in my sister's hand when she told 200 people at my own wedding reception that I'd stolen $40,000 from our grandmother's estate to pay for the flowers on every table. I was standing next to Sophie in my rented tuxedo, her hand still laced through mine from the first dance, when Claire tapped her glass and asked for everyone's attention like she was about to give a toast. She started warm, said how proud she was of her little brother, how Grandma Vivian would have loved seeing this day. And then her voice shifted and she said she couldn't stand up here and celebrate without being honest, that the money paying for tonight's open bar and the string quartet and the imported flowers had come out of an account that was supposed to be split evenly between us once probate closed. She said she'd been carrying this alone for weeks, not wanting to ruin my big day, but that watching everyone toast to my generosity when I'd quietly taken more than my share felt like something she couldn't sit through in silence. Sophie's hand went rigid in mine, her thumb stopping its slow circle against my knuckles mid-motion. My mother, 3 tables back, put her fork down slowly, the way she does when she's deciding whether to believe something terrible about one of her children. The DJ, standing off to the side, waiting to cue the next song, froze with his hand hovering over the laptop, clearly unsure whether this was still part of the program. A few guests near the head table exchanged glances, the kind that ask without words whether anyone else just heard what they heard. Claire kept the microphone close to her mouth, said she was sorry to do this here, but that she'd rehearsed saying it privately for weeks. And every time she pictured pulling me aside, she lost her nerve. So tonight, in front of everyone who loved us, felt like the only way she'd actually follow through. I said Claire's name quiet. The way you say a name when you still think a person might stop themselves if you just say it right. And she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since we were kids fighting over who got the last seat in the car. Except now she had a microphone and 200 witnesses, and I had nothing but a room slowly turning to look at me. Claire and I grew up 11 months apart, close enough that people used to ask if we were twins. And for most of my life, she was the person I trusted before anyone else. When our father left when I was 9, Claire was the one who sat with me on the stairs until I stopped crying, promising me she'd never leave the way he did. I remembered her driving 4 hours through a snowstorm the week I broke my leg in college, just to sit in my dorm room and make sure I had groceries. I remembered handing her my half of a small settlement after our car accident senior year, because her half alone wouldn't cover the medical bills, and she'd cried and said she'd pay me back double someday, that she'd never forget what I did. I remembered the two of us taking turns at Grandma Vivian's bedside in her final months, trading nights so neither of us collapsed from exhaustion, holding her hand through the parts that were hardest to watch. I remembered Claire showing up unannounced the week Sophie and I got engaged, just to help me pick out the ring, spending an entire Saturday walking store to store with me, because she said she wanted to make sure I didn't settle for something Sophie would only pretend to love. None of that mattered in that reception hall, with the string quartet still holding their bows mid-air, waiting to see if they should keep playing. What Claire didn't know, what I hadn't told a single person outside of Sophie and our family's estate attorney, was that 6 weeks before the wedding, that same attorney had called to tell me Grandma Vivian had left a private codicil naming me alone as the beneficiary of a separate savings account she'd built quietly over 30 years. Money Claire had no idea existed because Grandma had kept it apart from the main estate specifically, so it wouldn't get tangled up in whatever came after her. The attorney read the letter to me over the phone, Grandma's own words explaining that she'd watch me struggle quietly through school without ever asking anyone for help, and that she wanted this to be something just for me. No strings, No explanations owed to anyone. It was enough to cover the wedding twice over, without touching a cent of the shared estate account Claire was accusing me of raiding. I hadn't announced it because Grandma's letter, tucked inside the paperwork, asked me gently not to make a show of it, to use it quietly for something that mattered, and my wedding felt like exactly what she meant. I told Sophie the week we got engaged and swore her to the same quiet Grandma had asked of me, and she'd agreed without hesitation, understanding it wasn't about secrecy for its own sake, but about honoring a woman who'd never wanted attention for her own generosity while she was alive. 3 weeks after the wedding, Claire called a family meeting at our mother's house, framing it as a chance to sort out the estate calmly, away from prying eyes. But I could tell by the extra chairs set up in the dining room that this wasn't going to be a small conversation. She'd invited our aunt, our cousin who handled some of Grandma's finances toward the end, and even the family's longtime accountant, all seated around the table like a tribunal by the time Sophie and I walked in. There was a manila folder squared up neatly in front of Claire's seat, tabs sticking out at even intervals, the kind of preparation that told me this had been planned for days, not decided on impulse the way the wedding toast had seemed. Claire opened by restating everything she'd said at the wedding, this time with printed bank statements in front of her, circling the exact withdrawal dates in red pen, saying she wanted the family to see in black and white what she'd been carrying alone. Our mother sat at the head of the table, hands folded, saying nothing, clearly hoping this could resolve itself without her having to pick a side out loud. Our aunt asked if I had anything to say for myself, and for a moment I almost let it slide again, the way I had at the reception, still hoping some part of Claire would stop this before it went further. Around that time, our cousin Priya, who managed the household budgets for Grandma in her last 2 years, mentioned something odd in passing during a phone call with me, unrelated to any of this. She'd called originally just to check in after the wedding drama, asking how Sophie and I were holding up. And somewhere in the conversation, she said Grandma had once asked her, almost a year before she passed, to install a small camera near the study desk where she kept her important papers, saying she wanted a record of who came and went while she was too weak to keep track herself. Priya said at the time she thought it was just Grandma being cautious about a home health aide who came twice a week, someone none of us had fully trusted. And she'd honestly forgotten about the camera entirely once that aide left the job a few months later. She had forgotten about it entirely until I asked off the cuff whether any of that old footage still existed anywhere. She said she thought the storage drive was still in a box at her place, untouched since the funeral, sitting in a closet with a bunch of other things none of us had the heart to sort through yet, and she'd dig around if it mattered. I didn't think much of it at the time, just filed it away as a loose thread, but I asked her to look anyway, just in case. Back at the dining room table, our accountant, Mr. Delgado, cleared his throat and asked if he could speak. He said something had actually caught his attention weeks earlier while reviewing the estate paperwork, a separate account under Grandma's name that predated the main estate by decades, one that had been quietly moved into my name through a signed codicil filed with her attorney before she passed. He said he hadn't mentioned it sooner because he assumed the family already knew, and Claire's face went pale in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. And she'd broken something of Mom's she thought she'd get away with. I told the table calmly that the codicil was real, that Grandma had asked me to keep it quiet, and that every dollar spent on the wedding had come from that separate account, not the shared estate Claire was accusing me of draining. Claire said that was convenient, that I'd apparently discovered this generous secret gift right when it benefited me most. and accused me of forging paperwork to cover for what she still insisted was theft from the joint account. Mr. Delgado said the codicil had been filed and notarized well before the wedding date, with the attorney's own records to prove it, but Claire waved that off too, saying attorneys make mistakes and paperwork gets backdated more often than people think. Our cousin asked, not unkindly, whether Claire had any actual evidence of forgery beyond her own suspicion, and Claire went quiet for a moment before saying she just knew, the way you know something in your gut even without proof. And the table exchanged a few uncomfortable glances at that, because knowing something in your gut was not what any of them had come there expecting to hear as an answer. That was when Priya, sitting near the end of the table, said she had actually found the old footage from the study camera earlier that week, mostly routine, hours of Grandma reading or napping, except for one afternoon about 4 months before she passed, where the footage showed Claire alone at the desk, going through Grandma's checkbook while Grandma slept in the next room, and moving several $100s in cash out of a drawer that the family later learned had gone unaccounted for. Priya pulled the clip up on her phone right there and set it in the middle of the table so everyone could see the timestamp in the corner of the frame. Nobody had thought anything of small missing amounts here and there at the time, chalking it up to Grandma's own forgetfulness near the end. But seeing it laid out on video, time-stamped, changed the room instantly. Our aunt asked Claire directly if that was true, and Claire's voice, so steady a moment earlier, cracked as she said it wasn't what it looked like, that she had only been organizing things, that Grandma had told her to take whatever she needed for groceries that week. Our cousin asked why organizing required cash specifically, and Claire had no answer ready for that. The table's mood flipped entirely within minutes. Mr. Delgado said quietly that small, unexplained withdrawals like that, if pattern continued, would need to be disclosed to the probate court regardless of intent, since the estate was still technically open pending final distribution. Our aunt, who had defended Claire without hesitation minutes earlier, went silent and wouldn't meet her eyes. Claire tried once more to explain, saying the amounts were small, that she'd always intended to account for them eventually, that grief made people do things they weren't proud of. But nobody at the table seemed willing to argue on her behalf anymore. Within 2 weeks, the estate attorney formally flagged the discrepancy with the court overseeing probate, and Claire was required to produce a full accounting of every withdrawal she'd made from Grandma's accounts over the final 2 years, a process that dragged on for months and ultimately reduced her share of the remaining estate once several unexplained amounts couldn't be justified. The court appointed an independent reviewer to go through 18 months of statements line by line, and twice Claire had to appear in person to answer questions under oath about specific transactions, an experience she later described to our mother as the most humiliating stretch of her adult life. The family's small investment club, which Claire had managed informally for years using pooled money from cousins and aunts, quietly asked her to step aside after word got around. No one willing to say it outright, but everyone suddenly finding reasons not to attend her meetings anymore. The community theater group, where Claire had volunteered as treasurer for the past 3 summers, asked her to hand over the books early for an unscheduled audit, a request that had never happened before in all her years there. Even her closest friend from college, someone she'd known longer than she'd known Sophie, sent a short message saying she needed some space to process everything, and Claire told me later that silence hurt worse than anything anyone had said to her face, Claire showed up at my house on a Tuesday evening, eyes red, and said she was sorry, that she didn't know why she'd said what she said at the wedding, that some old resentment about always feeling like the one who gave more and got less had boiled over in the worst possible way and the worst possible place. She said she'd spent years quietly keeping score, feeling like she was the one who stayed close to home while I moved away for school, the one who handled Grandma's doctor's appointments while I visited on weekends, and got to be the fun sibling. And somewhere along the way, that resentment had curdled into something she didn't even recognize in herself until it was too late to take back. She said she never meant for it to spiral into probate court and lawyers and cousins refusing to sit near her at Thanksgiving. I told her I believed the apology was real and that I still needed time before I could sit across from her the way we used to. She nodded and left quietly. No slammed door, no last accusation. Just two people who used to finish each other's sentences standing awkwardly on a porch instead. Both of us aware that something between us had cracked in a way that saying sorry alone couldn't fully glue back together. I won't pretend the ending felt clean. I got the truth out, the accounting settled. The family mostly came back around to seeing things clearly. But the version of Claire who drove through a snowstorm just to check on me is not someone I fully got back. And some nights that cost more than the $40,000 ever did. That fall, Sophie and I hosted a small dinner at our place, just our mother Priya and a few close friends. No microphones, no toasts that turned into ambushes. Just quiet conversation over a meal we cooked together in our small kitchen. The table was set with mismatched plates because we hadn't finished unpacking the wedding gifts yet, and somehow that felt more honest than the perfectly arranged reception hall ever had. My mother squeezed my hand at one point and said she was proud of how I'd handled all of it, not with anger, just steadiness, and that Grandma would have wanted exactly that. Priya brought up an old photo of the three of us grandchildren as kids, all gap-toothed grins on Grandma's porch, and for a moment the room laughed together the way families do when the weight finally lifts a little. Claire wasn't there that night, and probably wouldn't be for a while, and I found myself okay with that, in a way that still surprised me. The empty chair at the end of the table, a quiet reminder of what the whole ordeal had cost even after the truth came out. If you've ever had someone you trusted turn a private struggle into a public spectacle to protect themselves, you know that winning the truth back doesn't always mean getting everything back. Sometimes it just means finally getting to breathe without waiting for the next accusation to land. I still think about Claire on the stairs when I was 9, and I know that version of her is still somewhere in there, buried under years of quiet resentment that never got said out loud until it exploded in the worst possible room. Maybe one day we find our way back to something close to what we had. Maybe we don't. Either way, I stopped needing her apology to feel like I could finally exhale. If this story hit home for you, hit like and subscribe because there's another one coming next week.